Gentleman's time's expired. Chair, and I recognize the gentleman from California, Mr. Khanna, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Dr. Call, one of the experts who I was talking to told me that Russia has 6 times the artillery as Ukraine. Is that true?
Not anymore. I think the reality is that we don't know precisely how much artillery Russia has left, but we do know that they have expended an extraordinary amount of it and that they are running low, which is why they're turning to the likes of North Korea and others in desperate search of more artillery.
Where would you put the ratio at now?
It's hard to say. We could talk more about this precisely in the classified setting, and a lot of it also depends on the assumptions you make about the viability of ammunition that Russia has had in storage for 40 or 50 years, going back to the Soviet days, so it's a little bit of an art rather than a science. I do think the Russians continue to have artillery, but they are suffering tremendous shortages at the front of artillery, which is why they're turning to countries like North Korea.
And as someone who deeply admires the president's policy and Tony Blinken's role, your role, and has voted for all the aid packages, I guess my question is, what is your confidence level at this point that Ukraine will be able to hold all the territory it currently holds in a war of attrition?
I think that, as Lieutenant General Sims has testified, the front line right now is kind of a grinding slog, and you're likely to see incremental gains on both sides. So, for example, the Russians have made some incremental gains around Bakhmut in recent weeks and months, but at the cost of thousands and thousands of casualties in these human wave attacks from the Wagner prisoners and others. So you may see small portions of territory change hands in the coming weeks and months. I do not think that there's anything I see that suggests the Russians can sweep across Ukraine and make significant territorial gains anytime in the next year or so. And we are making sure the Ukrainians have the capabilities to stop them from doing that, while at the same time giving them the capabilities to go on the offensive themselves to claw back more territory.
And I assume, Dr. Collier, assumption is contingent on the House continuing to support Ukraine with aid, or are you saying already with what we've given?
No, I mean, well, so first of all, the House, the Senate, the American people have been extraordinarily generous. We've spent about $31.7 billion in security assistance over the last year. We have about $12 billion remaining from the money that you all provided at the end of last year for the remainder of this fiscal year. It is true that Ukraine continues to depend on assistance from the United States and our allies and partners, and that will be true for some period of time. So yes, if the world walked away from Ukraine, then the balance would tip in Russia's favor, but there is no reason to believe.
And how many more rounds of aid do you expect? And I say this as someone who supported him and wants to continue to support him, but just in terms of the American public, how many more times do you think Congress needs to provide aid?
You know, it's difficult, and it's difficult because we don't know the course and trajectory of the conflict. The conflict could end 6 months from now. It could end 2 years from now or 3 years from now. I think the president has said that the United States will continue to support Ukraine for as long as it takes. I think we've had a good conversation today about why that's in the vital national interest of the United States. So I would hope that Congress would continue to be supportive. But we should only come and ask for what Ukraine really needs. And as this conversation has said, what we can account for and demonstrate to the American people is actually benefiting our interests.
And what do you think at the end is the end game? I mean, obviously we talk about a just peace. What does that look like to you, and how do we get there?
Well, of course, Ukraine has detailed its principles for a just peace. We just had more than 140 countries in the UN General Assembly essentially ratify their approach. I think a just peace would involve Russia withdrawing from the territory that they have illegally occupied from Ukraine. But ultimately, the Ukrainians are going to be the ones that determine what peace settlement is acceptable or not. Our position has been to make sure that at whatever point they enter into those conversations, they do so from a position of strength.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank the gentleman. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Waltz, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Call, did we successfully deter Russia from invading Ukraine? Did deterrence work? We had a whole series of diplomatic, economic sanctions, the most powerful sanctions the world has ever seen, not to mention our ongoing security assistance at the time. Did that work? Was it successful?
Clearly, because he invaded Ukraine, Putin was not deterred.
So it's safe to say deterrence failed in this case.
Well, one possibility is also that Putin was not deterrable as it related to going into Ukraine. He has been deterred as it relates to going after the United States or NATO.
So you would postulate that no matter what we provided Ukraine, deterrence would have failed.
I actually think our intelligence community is split on this view. Their assessment was that almost no amount of weapons prior to the conflict could have deterred Putin from going into Ukraine.
Well, I asked this in the sense that I was in Ukraine the month before. And at the time, the answer that the Ukrainians were receiving, that we received, was that Stingers, too escalatory, anti-ship missiles, too provocative, long-range artillery, certainly off the books and improbable. Other things will take too long to train on. And what we've seen is Stingers too provocative, then we provide them. Harpoons too provocative, then we provide them. HIMARS can't do that, then we give them. Patriots, absolutely not, then we give them. Tanks, Bradleys, heck no, takes too long. Now here we are a year later, we're providing them. I think, as we're patting ourselves on the back, providing an ally the arms they need to defend themselves, if we've decided it's within our interest after entire cities and whole regions have been devastated, probably isn't a good strategy. Would you agree with that?
Well, we did provide hundreds of millions of dollars in assistance in the months leading up to the war. And then, of course, Congress...
Actually, if we really rewind the clock, starting in 2014, we provided only non-lethal aid until 2017. Was that a mistake?
Well, I was then National Security Advisor to then Vice President Biden, and he favored providing lethal assistance like javelins. That's everybody knows that.
And the Obama administration
made a different decision.
Was that a mistake?
I think in retrospect, we should have provided them Javelin missiles. That's been the position of then Vice President Biden.
The Trump administration then provided.
It was a complicated tale,
right.
I think, as you recall from the transcript.
Let's move to burden sharing, because I think this is absolutely an issue I hear from my constituents and something we need to address as a policy matter. The United States provided $30 billion in security assistance. The next nearest is Germany at $3.5, a tenth of what we've provided. UK less than $3 billion, France less than $1 billion. They're in the 100 millions, and poor Estonia has provided 3 times, just by percentage of GDP, what France has provided. So all in total, even though our economies of the EU and the United States roughly the same, the Europeans have provided less than half of what we have, and we haven't even gotten into the rest that makes up the full $100 billion. Is that fair? Is that effective burden sharing?
Well, obviously, we've been working with our allies and partners throughout, and the Secretary of Defense has held now 9 of these Ukraine defense contact groups. They meet monthly.
No, I understand.
I'm going to answer your question. If you actually take the top 20 contributors of security assistance to Ukraine as a percentage of GDP, the United States ranks 10th. And there are a number of European countries that are above the bar. You mentioned Estonia. Latvia is also up there, but countries like Poland, Finland, Norway, Denmark, the Czech Republic, Sweden are all above us as a percentage of GDP. And then some of the countries that you mentioned are below us. But
I'm talking about right on the front lines, clearly in their interest, Germany in particular. What have we done to get Germany and France and Italy and these large economies clearly in the heart of NATO, in the heart of Europe, and directly, if we buy into the matter that this is in our interest because if Putin slices through Ukraine, he'll keep going. What have we done effectively to get them to step up to the plate, at least dollar for dollar, dollar for euro?
I think the Defense Department has certainly worked alongside the White House and the State Department on diplomacy in this regard from the very beginning. That's why the Secretary of Defense holds these monthly meetings. They started in Ramstein Air Base in Germany. The Germans, as of now, have provided $3.58 billion. The UK has provided $2.85 billion.
I read out the statistics.
Yeah.
I would just postulate, going forward, over the long term, just as we had in the Gulf War, where we had an effective diplomatic effort to pay for this, that this is a global issue.
Gentleman's time's expired. Chair,
I think we need to do a lot more to get Europe to step up. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank the chair and the ranking member for having this hearing on an ongoing basis on an important issue of oversight. This is an all-government approach that we have here. Secretary Yellen is in Ukraine right now, and we do have sanctions that no country has ever seen before. In terms of your area, particularly Mr. Storch, or for anyone that's here, some of those new sanctions, how helpful will they be in terms of the people that are trying to skirt those existing sanctions and get around them, and how helpful will they be in the overall effort?
Well, I'll just start from the oversight perspective. We have this working group. Part of the working group is the Department of Treasury OIG, so it's probably more a question for them than for the DoD OIG, because we have oversight over the security assistance.
Yeah.
In terms of the policy decision, that's not really sort of what OIGs do, so I'll turn it over to Dr. Call.
I'll just say, I think obviously the sanctions have put a dent in the Russian economy. We'll continue to magnify that. I think from a DoD perspective, the bigger constraint on the Russians is more likely to be the export controls, which are making it very difficult for Russia to recapitalize the military that has been shattered in Ukraine.
Okay. Just a quick question. Does Germany have different laws than we do in terms of their defense?
I mean, all the allies and partners we work with have different constraints, different laws. Germany was not, one of the reasons we didn't provide lethal assistance back in the Obama administration was because Germany was so opposed to doing it. So the fact that they provide any lethal assistance was a huge sea change for them. Now, I know that's frustrating for a lot of folks who want our allies and partners to do the most they can. We share that desire. But yes, our allies and partners all have their own domestic political constraints, their own domestic regulations, and a lot of them have had to change their own laws and practices in order to provide the historic support for Ukraine that we've seen.
Okay. The question, when we read something in the newspaper regarding someone being dismissed from a position in Ukraine and being replaced, this is a sovereign issue that each country has. They make their own decisions. But just a question, and I want to do this so we can avoid classified setting, just a question generally. If those decisions are made and they do deal with something that would be a concern in our oversight and everything, is that communicated to the U.S. and their allies informally?
I would say sometimes we're aware of the moves before they happen, and sometimes we're aware when we read about them, just like you do. I think the point from our matter of U.S. policy is that the importance of getting after corruption in Ukraine or anywhere else is at the top of our points of emphasis with Ukrainian leaders. I do think they are taking these issues seriously. I think it's a problem they're going to continue to work on, but the fact that they're making any progress in the midst of this existential fight, I think is quite remarkable, frankly.
Yeah, thank you. Mr. Storch, just an observation. I was a prosecutor before I was a member of Congress. And, when there's a line of questioning that occurs, and your job is one of monitoring and an ongoing investigation, whether something's there or not, but you're in the process of doing it, and you're asked a question publicly about what the outcome of that might be before it ever occurs. That must put you in a very difficult position to answer a question, and it might give the perception you're not answering the question when, indeed, you're not able to answer the question if you're doing your job properly. You want to comment on sometimes on the difficulty of that line of questioning when it's posed in a public setting like it is here?
I appreciate very much the observation, and that's exactly right, obviously. Our job in the IG community is to do independent oversight. And as an old boss of mine used to say, we hit it right down the fairway. I can't do that in golf, but my office does that in oversight. And so we're looking at these issues. We're trying to determine what happens, and we're going to report out as transparently as we can. But to try to get ahead of an ongoing audit or evaluation or to talk about, I can't even begin to speculate about investigations, puts us in a very difficult position. So I appreciate the sensitivity. If I can on corruption, I'd just add, when I was over in Kyiv, that was one of the things we really emphasized, both myself and my counterparts from the other two OIGs. And we met with everybody up to the Prime Minister and down the Minister of Defense and others, the importance of ensuring that corruption was being addressed and that we're being transparent about it. They all said they understood that. Now, obviously, as a career prosecutor at an IG, we're in the trust but verify business. But certainly certainly they indicated that they understand that issue. And finally, I just add that sort of in one of life's coincidences, I actually previously worked in Ukraine as a resident legal advisor for the Department of Justice, working on anti-corruption issues. So I hope that perspective helps my office as we look at what's going on here.
I yield back.
Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Indiana, Mr. Banks, for
Thank you,
5
Mr.
minutes.
Chairman. Dr. Call, you helped write the dangerous Obama-era Iran deal, the JCPOA. You helped negotiate it. Last November, President Biden was caught on video saying the deal was dead. Yet just this month, the administration has renewed sanctions waivers that are key to the deal. Why, in your opinion, is the Biden administration so hell-bent on reentering the new Iran deal?
Thank you for your question. Just as a technical matter, I was not involved in the negotiation of the Iran deal.
You helped write it.
I
Is that
didn't,
fair?
but
You were involved with it.
well, I worked in the administration when the deal was negotiated. The President and Secretary Blinken and others in the administration have made clear that we're not about to re-enter the JCPOA anytime soon.
Why did they attempt to re-enter it?
Well, because Iran's nuclear progress since we left the JCPOA has been remarkable. Back in 2018, when the previous administration decided to leave the JCPOA, it would have taken Iran about 12 months to produce one bomb's worth of fissile material. Now it would take about 12 days. And so I think there is still the view that if you can resolve this issue diplomatically and put constraints back on their nuclear program, it is better than the other options. But right now, the JCPOA is on ice because there was an arrangement on the table last summer that the Iranians were not willing to take. And of course, Iran's behavior has changed since then, not the least of which their support for Russia in Ukraine, which is the subject of the conversation here today. So I don't think we're on the precipice of re-entering the JCPOA.
So you're declaring defeat for the new Iran deal on behalf of the Biden administration.
I think our view, actually, I'm just stating what both the President and the Secretary of State have already said, which is that the JCPOA is not on the horizon in the near term. The administration's position remains that a diplomatic deal to put constraints around Iran's program remains the best alternative to prevent Iran from getting a nuclear weapon. But the President has also made clear that his policy is that Iran will not get a nuclear weapon, period, and that if a diplomatic outcome is not possible, that we have other options to deal with that problem.
So does it concern you that Putin and China are on the side of negotiating the same deal that you helped craft during the Obama administration?
There are no active P5+1 negotiations, so China and Russia being at the table or not being at the table are not terribly
Can you
germane.
shed light for us on why we tapped Russians to help negotiate on America's behalf in the renewed negotiations during the Biden administration?
It's not clear to me what you're referencing, but I think that during the Obama administration, at least, the Russians were able to compartmentalize differences that we had in some areas and the common view of not wanting Iran to get a nuclear weapon. I think we're not in the same place right now because the Russians, because of how badly they're doing in Ukraine, are becoming increasingly dependent on Iran, and therefore I think are a lot less likely to put pressure of any kind on Iran to accede to any diplomatic agreement because they're trying to get Iran to ship them more drones, missiles, and other capabilities.
In 2021, did you expect the invasion of Ukraine?
In 2021, in 2021 we warned the world about, I'm sorry?
You expected it? You anticipated it?
Beginning in the fall, I think it's of public record. Beginning in the fall, we had very good intelligence that Vladimir Putin was putting the pieces in place to be able to carry out a large-scale invasion. We began to downgrade, declassify, and share that information with the world in the fall of 2021.
Then why, shed light for us, then why did the Biden administration lift sanctions on Nord Stream 2 if we anticipated it?
Well, I think the timelines are different in those. You should correct me if the record is different. I believe the Nord Stream conversations were several months before. And largely that was in order to stay united with Germany, but also to give us a leverage point. In fact, what's interesting is that had that not gone forward, the ability of Germany to then essentially walk away from the deal would not have been effective punishment or leverage over the Russians. But these were not linked in time.
In hindsight, should we regret that decision to lift those sanctions?
You know, I work at the Defense Department. I wasn't involved in any of those deliberations, so I'd really defer those questions to the Treasury Department and the State Department. I don't have an opinion on that conversation. No, I don't.
Okay, thank you. I yield back.
Thanks.